Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good evening, everybody. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Can everybody hear me clearly? Can y'all write to one of the facilitators or the supporters that you can hear, or at least raise a hand? Can everybody hear me?
I can hear you. You can continue.
We can continue. Okay. All right. I'd love to welcome everybody to this presentation. And we're going to be talking about how to deal with the fear of public speaking. I want to know if this webinar. Okay. So the objective.
Please start your presentation.
Sorry?
Please start your presentation. Still, we cannot see you.
Yes, sir. You can't see it?
No.
Okay, let me see. Main screen.
Yeah, but you need to go and share your presentation from the sharing panel.
I think now.
Yeah, now it's okay.
I think now.
Yes.
Now it's okay.
Okay.
How do I minimize this panel? Is that clear?
Yes, it's clear now.
Okay. So welcome everybody. Sorry for that technical foul-up and issue that happened. So we're here to discuss how to deal with public speaking. So the objective is to give Toastmasters practical tips on how to manage their fears as they speak publicly. The structure of this webinar will first go through setting the scene. Then we'll move on to what is fear and where it comes from. But there's also a surprise here regarding fear. We'll have a small part between the two sessions, which is for questions regarding fear, where it comes from, and the surprise. The second session will move on to tips for public speaking. And the fifth part will be reflections, which is a summary, and finally, questions. So let's set the scene. The 6th century BC Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said, "There is no illusion greater than fear." Ladies and gentlemen, 193 million people in the United States are diagnosed with glossophobia. This figure makes up 74% of the United States population. Glossophobia leads necrophobia, which is the fear of death, by 6%, which means people fear public speaking more than they fear death. In addition, glossophobia has infected and infested every nation, society, and has held you back from achieving your greatness. My fellow Toastmasters, glossophobia is the medical terminology for the fear of public speaking. Let us imagine that 50%, just only 50% of the world's population fears public speaking. This means 3.7 billion people. Let me repeat that. 3.7 billion people who fear public speaking. Now, we all have things that we believe in. We all have hopes, dreams that we want to achieve, goals we want to reach, and we have obstacles that we hope we overcome one day. Maybe that is to get a promotion, or to live life as a leader, or maybe it's to communicate to a loved one without hurting their feelings, or to speak in a public setting effectively, or to live life simply without fear. But as time passes by and we pick up a book or two, or watch a video, or even attend a public course on public speaking, we notice that nothing changes within us. We still feel unease and nervous as we step on the stage. At times like these, it is easy to give up, to feel discouraged, and to allow the thought that I am never going to get better creep in. So you start to settle in and learn to live with that fear. And the worst part is, you accept it as a part of who you are. So we begin to ask ourselves, why does this happen to me? All I'm trying to do is develop myself, become a better member of my family, society, and the nation in which I live. Why does it happen to me? However, statistics tell us that you are not alone. We can safely say that over 50% of the world's population, 3.7 billion people, feel what you feel and fear what you fear. So there is hope, ladies and gentlemen. You see, the famous psychiatrist, Dr. Abraham Tversky, once described the stress we feel at times like these. He began by asking a simple question: how does a lobster grow? You see, the lobster is a soft creature that lives inside a hard shell. So as its internal organs begin to grow, it puts stress and pushes against the hard shell. This in turn stimulates the feeling of stress for the lobster. Inside, it feels stressed. It's trapped. It can't expand. It cannot move. So it begins to seek safety under a rock and breaks free from its shell, and thus growing a new shell. You see, fellow Toastmasters, the thing that triggers growth for the lobster is stress. So if you're feeling stress regarding public speaking, it is a sign that you are ready to grow. And we will show you how. Moving on to the second part of our webinar, we ask, what is fear and where it comes from? And of course, there is a surprise. But before we cast light on fear, I would like to share a concept that is the most important discovery until now in my life. And that is the difference between fear and anxiety. You see, fear is the unpleasant emotion that is caused by the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Anxiety, on the other hand, is the feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease about an uncertain outcome. That is the key word, an uncertain outcome. So fear is what you feel when you're driving down the road and suddenly a kid steps into your lane. That is what you feel is fear. Fear is what you feel when you're diving and out of nowhere a shark appears. Anxiety, on the other hand, is the anticipation of danger, that something might happen. It is false fear. It is worry about an outcome that has not came into existence. So in order for us to distinguish between the two, we must first look at the human mind. The human mind is the greatest tool that has ever been created. It is the vessel that has carried our civilization to where we stand today. And with this tool, we can truly accomplish greatness. So let us dive into the dark oceans of our mind and try to make sense on how to manage our anxieties. It is important for us to know how our brain responds to stimuli, which triggers the sense of anxiety. So there are main parts of the brain. These parts are the thalamus, the cortex, the amygdala, and the hippocampus. The thalamus has two primary actions. The first is to break down incoming visual messages by size, shape, and color, which by using your eyes. And the second action is to break down audio messages, which we receive through our ears by volume and dissonance. This is then sent to the cortex, the back of your brain. The cortex gives raw signs and sounds meaning. This allows you to become conscious of what you are seeing and hearing. For example, if you are on stage, you see the audience and the eyes send messages to your thalamus. The thalamus breaks down the audience into size, shape, color, and the noises that you hear on stage. This is then sent to the cortex, which basically tells your brain that you are standing on stage in front of people. The amygdala is the emotional core of the brain, whose primary role is to trigger the fear response. So it is responsible for what we feel when we are on stage. The fear response is a biochemical reaction that we will discuss later. But the information passing through the amygdala is associated with an emotional significance. So here, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about emotion. There's also a part just behind the amygdala, which you can't see here, is the bed nucleus of the striatal terminals. This, by the way, is particularly important when we're discussing anxiety. While the amygdala sets off immediate burst of fear, so it's the first responder when you see, feel, or hear something that scares you. But these terminals cause a continuation of a fear response, and it acts as a long-term unease. We all felt this from time to time in our life. For example, when we have done very badly on a presentation, and we still feel bad after the presentation is over. The lucus coeruleus receives these signals from the amygdala and initiates a classical anxiety response. The anxiety response that you feel is a rapid heartbeat. Your heart starts to beat very quickly. You got to increase blood pressure. Your body temperature rises. And so you begin to sweat in an attempt to cool your body. How many of us felt like this when we stood on stage? This is what happens. It is a biochemical reaction that happens inside your body. The hippocampus is our memory center. Basically, it's the hard disk of the brain. It stores raw information from the senses along with emotional baggage. So here is where your memory and emotion collide. It becomes one. This is also connected to your amygdala. So now that we know the key parts of what is associated with our fear, what happens when we stand on stage or feel nervous about something, whether it's a meeting, interview, or even a social gathering? Some people have social anxiety. The sounds and sight that we gather from our basic tools, which are our eyes and ears, are the first to process by the thalamus, filtering incoming information and sending it to the amygdala. When we are faced with a threat or feel fear, the signals are sent directly to the cortex, which is at the bottom of the brain. Any message from our senses that are associated with a bad memory or a threat in the amygdala, whether that threat is real or not, current or not, are immediately processed and trigger a fear response. And this is the express way it happens before we even know it. Let me repeat that because that could be a very important message for us. Any information or any message from our senses, from our eyes and ears, that are associated with a bad memory. If you had a bad experience in the past, you got up on stage and people laughed at you, or you got up on stage and people booed you. But also in our culture, when you stand up, you're reminded of back in the school days when you did something bad. You did not do your homework, or you did not memorize a passage. And this response has an emotional effectiveness. Whether this threat is real or not, current or not, which means can be in the past, has an immediate response by triggering your fear. And this, although we're not to discuss religious issues in our Toastmaster meetings, but this supports this verse. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم لو اطلعت عليهم لوليت منهم فرارا ولملئت منهم رعبا. See, if you saw them, you would run fiercely, and you will then feel fear. This is an express way response fear. To simplify all what I've just said, I know it has to do with brain science, but to simplify it, anxiety has two stages. The first is a biochemical reaction that occurs inside our body. This is adrenaline is released. This allows our heart to increase in rate, resulted in a high blood pressure, increased body temperature, and finally, we begin to sweat in an attempt to cool our bodies. The second stage is our emotional response to the biochemical reaction. This is highly personalized, which means it's different from one person to another. And we see this manifested in extreme sports. The emotional response has full control of how you feel, but also you have full control on how to deal with it. For example, this is me deciding to go bungee jumping in New Zealand. Although it's not obvious from the picture, I had the full effects of the biochemical reaction. My heart was racing, I had high blood pressure, and I felt the adrenaline in my body. And you can't see it, but I began to sweat. However, that emotional response had no authority over my decision because I decided to jump. Letting go of my fears and stepping in greatly into faith's hands. And to cool down my sweat, I was dunked into the river. So how do we deal with anxiety? You can never eliminate anxiety because anxiety has a survival mechanism which helps us in bad situations. The best way to deal with this is repeated exposure. You see, similar situations lead to familiarity, which means the more that you do something, the more it feels natural. And this is why it's vital